In June 2022, a possible collision course between Kenya and China burst into public glare. This happened when the National Assembly's Public Investment Committee tabled a report before the House demanding the review of a clause that attaches the Port of Mombasa as collateral in the $2.7 billion standard gauge railway loan contract with China. As per this clause, if Kenya defaults with the SGR loan, then we can kiss the Port of Mombasa goodbye. This is what was contained in the parliamentary report. If you want to know what China does to countries that default on loan repayment, just take a look at Zambia and Sri Lanka. These two countries are said to have defaulted in their loan repayments, leading to grave consequences. They took these loans for construction of major projects including ports, mines and power plants. Let's focus on Sri Lanka, which lost Hambantota International Port to China several years ago. The Hambantota Port is located in southern Sri Lanka, close to the east-west sea route. Its construction began in 2008 through Chinese loans amounting to $1.3 billion. By 2016, the port was under the ownership of the Sri Lanka Ports Authority. It had incurred losses of nearly $153 million. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka had until 2036 to repay almost $1.7 billion to China as the principal and interest for the loan that it had taken to build this port. At that time, in the mid-2010s, the debt repayment for this loan was about $100 million annually. By this time, it was also clear that the port wasn't commercially viable, which is exactly what earlier feasibility studies had shown. Unfortunately, a favorable study had later paved the way for this expensive port project to proceed. In December 2016, the Sri Lankan government announced that ongoing losses made it necessary to restructure the port in collaboration with China Merchants Port Holdings Company, CM Port, in order to make it commercially viable. It was at this point that Chinese claws began wresting the port away from the people of Sri Lanka. Between 2016 and 2017, a number of documents were concluded between the Sri Lankan government and the China Merchants Port Holdings Company. A concession agreement was later signed in July 2017. Consequently, two newly created entities called the Hambantota International Port Group and the Hambantota International Port Services Company Limited took control of the Hambantota Port and its operations and management for a period of 99 years. Just like that, the people of Sri Lanka lost their port. The China Merchants Port Holdings Company is a major shareholder in both of these two companies. It slid into the driver's seat of these companies after ostensibly investing $1.12 billion for the acquisition stake of 85% stake in one of the companies and 52% stake in the other one. This means that CM Port now owns this Sri Lankan port for the next 99 years. China is the new sheriff in town. Despite selling its birthright by giving up the port, Sri Lanka still owes China the debt that necessitated the takeover in the first place. To illustrate the sheer absurdity of this matter, let me tell you about my Nissan Sunny B14. This was my first car. I had bought it using a bank loan. I defaulted on that loan. The bank repossessed the car and my debt was cleared. But that's not the case for the people of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka still owes China the $1.3 billion that it borrowed for the port's construction. Why does Sri Lanka still owe China? Because it didn't use the money that it was paid after essentially selling the port. It didn't use that money to pay the debt. They must have kicked the can down the road and used the money for other pressing national matters. It's not clear what they used the money for, but what is clear is that Sri Lanka still owes China the port loan. Yet, China now owns the port. Remember that Nissan Sunny that I've just told you about, that I lost to the bank? Imagine if the bank had given me the money they made after selling the car, instead of using that money to clear my debt. Why would I even allow that to happen? Evidently, the Sri Lankan government allowed this to happen. They must have concluded that it was up to future generations to deal with the migraine headache of that port loan. Better use the $1 billion they were paid to solve other pressing national matters. The Chinese were more than happy to go along with this arrangement. After all, now they had the port and was still owed money, which meant even more interest payments. Zambia must be careful not to walk down this slippery path that leads to a bottomless pit. They are probably almost falling into that pit. It's just that they cannot come out openly to announce to the world that, hey guys, we have lost one or several of our national assets to China because of defaulting on our loan repayment. Kenya may not be on this slippery path yet, but we're hurtling towards it. Earlier this year in March 2023, the cabinet approved the Privatization Bill 2023. This bill gives powers to the National Treasury to privatize publicly owned enterprises without the approval of Parliament. While this bill may seemingly enhance efficiency in the privatization process, it will also rip away parliamentary oversight that would put brakes on Kenya's hurtle towards the Sri Lanka debacle. If privatization ends up discreetly placing Kenyan assets into the hands of China or any other foreign entity for that matter, it will rob us of critical revenue for generations and generations to come. Africa must find a new way of building ports and roads.